Good evening and greetings, fellow truth seekers. Welcome back, just briefly, it'll be quick, to Genesis chapter 31. This is from our lesson Sunday, Time to Go Home, as Yahweh had directed Jacob to return to Canaan, to return to the Promised Land. This was lesson 40 in our series. As you are all aware, I always have supplemental material at the end of our lessons, and time permitting, we deal with those things, and if time doesn't permit, most of the time it just hits the cutting room floor. I recognize we can't cover everything about every verse. Time does not permit that type of study. We've already been 40 weeks in the lesson, in the Genesis study so far. But there was something I really wanted to touch upon this past Sunday and didn't get to it, just to make you aware of it. It's not a big deal. It's not a showstopper, but I wanted you to be aware of it. And so it really begins, and we'll pick up first with Genesis 31:19. So Jacob has been directed by Yahweh to leave. He's conferred with his wives. They agree they should leave. Laban has mistreated them as well. And we read in Genesis 31:19, Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. Now, as I told you in class, the Hebrew word translated in English there as household gods is the Hebrew word teraphim. Teraphim were small idols. They were small statues. They were household gods. They were like shrines that many in the ancient Middle East had. They were pagan. It was a pagan practice. Now, this portion of the story, in all honesty, is a little strange and generates a couple of questions. It's strange that Rachel would steal the household gods from Laban, her dad, after hearing from Jacob all that God had done on their behalf. Jacob had just shared with Rachel and Leah the amazing ways that God was working in the background so that no matter what Laban said the wages were, if he said spotted, they bore spotted. The sheep and the goats bore spotted. If he said streaked, they bore streaked. And so after Jacob gives all the glory to Yahweh, then all of a sudden we read as they're getting ready to leave and go back to Canaan, Laban is away shearing the sheep, a 3 days journey, we read that Rachel steals these teraphim, and it is a little strange. But it gets stranger. In a few verses later, Genesis 31:22, when it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. So it was 3 days before he learned they had left, and that was because he was 3 days away shearing his sheep. Upon learning, he immediately goes home. He learns that his teraphim, his household gods, have been stolen, and he pursues 7 days, over 300 miles, Jacob and Jacob's entourage. And you'll see his grandest concern is not that Jacob left with his daughters and grandchildren without saying goodbye, although that's one of the charges he levels against Jacob. His grand concern is that someone, Jacob, he thinks, has stole these teraphim. So this generates yet another question. Why would Laban chase down Jacob 7 days, over 300 miles in the desert, to retrieve and recover little statues that he could have bought in the market? Again, this portion of the story seems a little strange. And then finally we read, and this is after Laban has caught up with Jacob. Laban has confronted Jacob. Jacob denies that he stole the gods, and in fact says, whoever stole them, we'll put him to death. He doesn't realize Rachel stole them, and Moses tells us that. But Jacob gives permission for Laban to search through everyone's tents. And here's what we read. Beginning in verse 33, so Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants, that would be Bilhah and Zilpah. He did not find them, the teraphim. And he went out of Leah's tent, and he entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find them, but did not find them. I added the he, forgive me. Now this all seems a little excessive. Now he's rummaging and pillaging through everyone's tents, trying to find these small statues that he could purchase in a local shop or in the local market. Now, before I say another word and really get to what I want to say, keep in mind what Rachel did was wrong. Regardless of why she did it, and that's what we're briefly going to talk about, stealing from her father was wrong. It was morally wrong. God would not have condoned it. So I am in no way trying to excuse Rachel's behavior. Rachel's behavior was sinful. She sinned. And thank God that Laban didn't find them in her tent. We don't know how the story might have went had that happened. But as you think about this story and just the oddity of these events, it turns out that archaeology, in particular over the last 100 years, but even tighter over the last 50, has shed some new light on what might have been in play here. So first, let's talk about the Nuzi tablets. Now, on a few occasions, I've discussed in the class that many ancient laws, customs, and practices that existed at that time and in this area of the world, we've learned about through the Nuzi tablets. Now, if you're just hearing this statement, the Nuzi tablets are ancient documents that date back to the time of the patriarchs. They cover laws and customs and practices of the people of that day. They were initially found in Nuzi, that's an ancient Mesopotamian city. To date, I believe they found around 7,000 tablets. And so to give you an idea where we're talking about, we're all familiar with Ur. We watched Abram's dad called out of Ur. We're all familiar with Haran. We've been in Haran as Jacob has been there laboring for Laban. This is Nuzi. Now, Nuzi was a Haranian administrative center not far from the Haranian capital of Kirkuk in northern Iraq. The Haranians are equivalent to the Horites in the Old Testament, who are also called the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So that's the who and really the where. So Nuzi, and we're talking about Old Testament people really equivalent to the Hivites, the Jebusites, and the Horites. So that gives you an idea of who. Now let's talk about what. I told you that to date, around 7,000 of these tablets have been found. Now, according to Henry Morris, in his commentary, he wrote, quote, "Customs seen at Nuzi are now known to be widespread in the ancient Near East, and some persist today." Well, interestingly enough, the Nuzi tablets record an interesting event that involves the teraphim. This quote comes from Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum's commentary, and he provides a section from the Nuzi tablets. And I'll butcher some names here, so forgive me, but you'll get the point of what's coming from the Nuzi tablets. "If Nashwi has a son of his own, he shall divide the estate equally with Walu, who is an adopted son. But the son Nashi shall take the teraphim of Nashi. However, if Nashi does not have a son of his own, then Wulu shall take the teraphim." You see, owning the teraphim, the household gods, meant that you had legitimate claim on all of the property. Now, as you think about that, could it be that Rachel stole the teraphim in an attempt to gain Laban's property for Jacob, or in an attempt to ensure the legal status of all the property that Jacob had already acquired from Laban because God had moved Laban's flock to Jacob? I don't know, but could it be that? Archaeology actually has more to say. This time it comes from the Code of Hammurabi. Now, I know what you're thinking, here we go again, but what I want you to see is the Bible is anchored in history, in the history of the time. So we've talked about the Nuzi tablets, but again, the Code of Hammurabi is another great source, in particular for laws related to people of this day and time. So Hammurabi was the sixth king of the Amorite first dynasty of Babylon. He ruled from 1792 to 1750. He secured Babylonian dominance over the Mesopotamian plain. In fact, to give you an idea of that dominance, in this inner circle was his kingdom when he came into power. This was Hammurabi's kingdom when he came into power, and this was the expansion of his kingdom while he was king. The Babylonian Empire, the Amorite first dynasty of Babylon, enjoyed a massive expansion of power under the rule of Hammurabi. This is the Stela of Hammurabi, or the Code of Hammurabi. It is a legal text that was composed in approximately 1750 BC and is the longest legal text from the Middle East during this time. Although it's hard to see here, it contains 4,130 lines of cuneiform text and outlines 282 laws. This basalt stela is 7 foot 4.5 inches tall. The Code of Hammurabi states, whoever had or whoever possessed the household gods, the teraphim, had legal claim to the property. And this is a close-up of the stela, and here you can see Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god, who is also the god of justice, and you can see the cuneiform text. I would ask the question again, could it be that Rachel stole these teraphim in an attempt to gain Laban's property for Jacob, or to gain a legitimate claim for the property that Jacob already had? J.P. Free, in his article Archaeology in the Bible, writes this about the episode we studied this past Sunday. Rachel stole, quote, Rachel stole Laban's images, or teraphim. When Laban discovered the theft, he pursued his daughter and son-in-law, and after a long journey overtook them. Genesis 31:19-23. Commentators have long wondered why he would go to such pains to recover images he could have replaced easily in the local shops. The Nuzi tablets record one instance of a son-in-law who possessed the family images, having the right to lay legal claims to his father-in-law's property, a fact which explains Laban's anxiety. Close quote. Could it be that Rachel stole the teraphim in an attempt to gain Laban's property or secure a legitimate legal claim for the property that Jacob already possessed? Henry Morris, in his commentary, wrote this, quote, Rachel may have stolen them, that's the teraphim, with the thought that possessing them would somehow help validate the legitimacy of her husband's title to the flocks he had acquired while serving Laban and represent the inheritance she had a right to expect. Close quote. Now, we may never know for sure about what's going on with these household gods, but here's what I want you to see. Over and over again, we see that the Bible is anchored in history. And even things that at the time, up until 100 years ago, this seemed really strange. But many of the customs and many of the practices that were common to the people of those days flow out of Genesis as if we were reading about the history right when it happened, thousands of years ago, in this case 4,000 years ago. The Bible stands above all other books. It is not only God's revelation to man, but it is a book that is rooted in actual time and history, time and space. Archaeology over and over and over again prove the veracity of the scriptures. And so I wanted to give you just a few minutes, turned out to be 13, on these teraphim and what might have been going on and why Rachel may have stolen them and why Laban may have been so concerned about them. Okay, I look forward to seeing you guys next Sunday in class as we crack open Genesis 32 and we see that Jacob has to deal with Esau. God bless you until we meet in class.